You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you. You get me, feel it, you. You get me, got you. You get me.
Hello, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And let's get right to it. I am so happy to be joined today by Dr. Kurt Ver Beek. Kurt Ver Beek co-founded the Association for a More Just Society with his wife Joanne and four Honduran friends with the dream of transforming Honduran systems to serve the poor and vulnerable. He currently serves as the president of ASJ Honduras and collaborates with experts in Honduras to develop innovative solutions to strengthen public systems. Kurt taught as a professor of sociology for Calvin University, where he directed the Honduras Justice Studies semester with Joanne for 20 years. He is the author of Call for Justice, co-written with Christian philosopher Nicholas Walterstorff about the theory and practice of justice. And Kurt and his family have lived in Honduras for almost 40 years. Dr. Ver Beek, Kurt, thank you so much for doing this. How you doing?
It's great to be here, Corey.
It is great to be here. Just so our listeners know, I usually record late morning by me or maybe early to mid afternoon. We're doing it bright and early, and it's bright and early for Dr. Verbeek as well. Kurt, man, we're both early risers, so I hope we're at the top of our game.
We have our full energy load at the moment.
As well, I haven't gotten to my even halfway through my first cup of coffee yet, so that's that's debatable. One of the things I was curious about, I've listened to a few interviews and I read an account of your work there, your years there in Honduras and a little bit prior to that. But one thing a lot of folks haven't asked you about is Mr. Harley Dale Verbeek. I was really curious what it was like having a middle school principal as a dad and how that was formative for you.
Well, I know at least one person's going to have to listen to this now, so you're going to make him very happy. So my dad and mom were very formative. I think in a bunch of ways. They were Christians. He was there was a grade school, middle school principal of a private Christian school. Um, and they were Republican. They were fairly conservative, I would say. But like a few things that shaped me, my dad got we lived in the Chicago suburbs. My dad got the Chicago Tribune every day, and every day he would read it like cover to cover. And that got me interested. And I started reading already like in high school. And my now wife, then girlfriend, when I was in college, got me a subscription to the Chicago Tribune so I could keep reading it. And my interest, I think, in politics and in corruption. And then I think all of that shaped with my Christian faith, into an interest in justice. And like, there's so many things broken in Chicago and in Honduras. And it's clear to me that God calls us to protect the poor, the vulnerable, the widow. And so how do we do that, right? So I think my mom and dad both shaped me both in faith, um, and in how do we live that faith out?
Mm. So I want to settle there for a second. Earlier on in your formative years, I'm curious, number one, about your faith journey with your dad being an administrator of a private Christian school. I'm assuming you had a Christian upbringing or you were raised in the church. Did you come to, your own understanding of faith, Christian faith early on? Was that something you were always aware of, or was it something you developed later in life? And then specifically as it pertains to justice, when was that? Oh gosh, the only word I can think of is I was thinking of allergy, but that's not what it is. It's like a sensitivity,
Mhm.
like you're allergic to injustice. I read about an account of you just having allergy to when you saw bullies. I don't know why the word allergy is coming to me, but
Reaction.
yeah,
Yeah.
reaction. That's a good way to put it.
Um, yeah, well, you did your homework. Nice job, Corey. Um, so Yes, I grew up, so my family is Dutch, like third or fourth generation, fled the Netherlands because of religious persecution. So faith was very important. Those Dutch communities spread out from New York to Michigan, Iowa, California. There's a bunch. Christian Reformed Church was the church that I belonged to. And Christian education was super important for that. So my dad was a principal, but I went through Christian school, Christian high school, and then in Calvin University, which is also associated with with the church. And so I think I was immersed from, birth to going out into my professional life in a worldview that I'm mostly very grateful for. Um, and I think one of those things, John Calvin, a theologian named Abram Kuypers, says, John Calvin says there is no calling above another. Like the bricklayer is important as the pastor, that work is important, and that Kuyper says, we are called to transform every square inch of this earth. So I think there's a piece of all of that that says we are agents of change in this world. God is calling us to make a difference, and that includes politics that often people are scared about. And I think that piece, the justice piece, is a strong thread. Often it's a strong thread in lots of Protestant churches and the Catholic Church, often ignored, but it's there. John Calvin produced the first public schools and first public hospitals in Geneva in Europe. And it was the church did that, like John Calvin is a pastor, and he helped found those. So there's lots of cool stuff there. I think when I first my first memories is because I was a child of a principal. When I went to high school, it was a different school. The high school kids were waiting for me, and a little bit of not a little bit, a lot of payback for what my dad had done to them, they took out on me. So especially my freshman year was not good. My mom said I had ulcers. I like threw up sometimes before going to school because I was afraid of what was going to happen. And I think that and a bunch of other things in my growing up made me especially sensitive to like bullying, to being mistreated, to sort of not following the rules and doing things right. Um, and in middle of high school, I already knew I wanted to go at least for a little while to some other country and help and do something. I had a very vague, I thought it had to be farming because because I thought like what poor people need, it must be farming. But by the time I ended college, I was a sociologist and a social worker and interested in more strategic, systematic change. So.
Is that the time when you started to think about missionary work?
Yeah, so I'd say I don't think I called it missionary work. I still probably wouldn't, but that I wanted to go to another country and I wanted to help poor people and I wanted to do it in Jesus' name. So some people call that missionary. I was never interested in being a pastor or an evangelist directly. I mean, I think that's again some messed up theology that the Christian Reformed Church gets right, that we shouldn't be separating preaching the gospel and acts of justice and mercy. It's all what we're all called to.
If I may, that was one thing I was curious about because your work, your almost 40 years there, represents something different. I became a Christian about 25 years ago, late in my late 20s, and immediately was learning about the missionaries that we were supporting. I supported a few. Even went on a couple short-term missions. There was a lot of focus on, I might not be giving it a fair shake right now, but it was basically like there was sales KPIs. Did you preach the gospel? Did they give their life to the Lord?
How
Everybody was,
many raised their hand? How many
yeah,
came in front? Huh?
yeah. So what your work and focus is different. I don't get that sense that that you were looking to close some deals. You know.
So I think our first chunk of years here, we were working with our church, was now called World Renew, an organization that does sort of like World Vision. That's the easiest way. I think World Vision sorts of work with the poor here, along with churches. So we were both trying to motivate churches to see, sometimes it's called integral mission, that our mission is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So
Right.
it's not evangelize your neighbor, it's love your neighbor. So like that mission is much bigger than just evangelizing. So we were both trying to convince the church to do that, but also trying to do that and trying to show what that looked like. So it did end up being some agriculture projects, health projects, literacy, microenterprise, in Jesus' name. And but then when we switched to ASJ, it became much more. So we work very closely with the Catholic and the Protestant Church here. We are trying to protect the vulnerable. We are trying to. We're a Christian organization, not Catholic, not Protestant. And we feel very clearly that our call, I mean, what our mission statement is, we are called to be brave Christians,
Mm.
and that we are trying to make the systems of Honduras, the justice system, the education system, the public systems that the poor depend on, more just. And so that's what we are called to do. And, I often think a guy an Italian, who was here working with the UN, got to know our work early on. And he said, you're the first Christians I've met that seem to be doing the stuff that Jesus did. And he said, I'm too old for this stuff now, but he said, I think if I would have met you earlier in my life, I would have been interested in becoming a Christian. And I think that's often what we feel like, that we are appealing to younger Christians in Honduras and also in the US, and showing them that being a Christian doesn't have to look like what they often see. And this idea of brave Christians, I think, it's both biblical, but it's also attractive.
Mm. At what point did that mindset or that theological framework and practice change for you? So, just to clarify what we're talking about, traditional missionary work, and I'm glad that you corrected me, that the way we think of it is evangelism, saving souls, or even like short-term missions, going down and building a house, digging a well, providing services. Not to say that that isn't of value, but your focus seems to have become something even more fundamental. In your case, literally life and death. People were being murdered at a higher rate in your area than anywhere else in the world. How did you come to that clarity that that's the focus of your work, as opposed to what we traditionally think of as, going out in the name of Jesus in other parts of the world, as you put it?
Mhm. But I think the theological piece is one piece, and then my own personal journey is a little
Well, let's
separate.
talk about both.
Yeah.
I'm curious about it all.
So I think the theological journey, it wasn't such a long one for me, because, as I said, in my church, I grew up not seeing those so distinctly as some people do. There are churches where people are brought up to think what you do on Sunday is what's important, and I have people who say, I work 51 weeks a year at a job, but my week in Honduras is my mission. This
Mm,
is and that's sad, right? I
yeah.
think we should be living out our mission every day, wherever we are, trying to love our neighbor as ourselves, as Jesus said. But there's a lot of really great literature, but especially in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of stuff coming out of the US and Latin America, what's often called integral mission, and this idea that we have messed up by separating sort of the spiritual and the material, and that God somehow only cares about our souls and the rest of it isn't important. And it's clear in the Bible that's not true, but that it goes all the way back to Roman times, and I
Yeah.
won't go into all the theological history. But
No,
there's
I'm really fascinated by that and how we sorry to interrupt, but how we tend
sure.
to make that confusion. Because as I read the Bible, maybe it's just because I had a fresh pair of eyes by the time I read through the New Testament the first time, but there's a very, for lack of a better word, like this worldly element to it. You know, Jesus bodily raised from the dead in my reading of it. Thomas wanted to touch him, the risen Jesus, the bodily risen Jesus, and there's so many other core tenets that tell me there's not a separation, that God is redeeming his creation, this world, right? Um,
Yep.
so I don't
So
know, maybe you could pick up on that, but is that,
yeah, I won't go, I could talk a long time about that, but I think just the life of Jesus and then the life of the apostles is probably the best example. Like Jesus went around preaching, but he certainly didn't only do that, right?
yeah,
And people would come to him when they were sick and he would heal them. He went into the temple and he saw corruption. He saw people ripping off poor people. So the
yeah,
money changers would give poor people a bad exchange rate because they didn't know better. They'd sell them defective animals. And Jesus went in the temple, he made a whip. He whipped the people to get them, the money changers out. He threw over their tables. Like that shows both his anger at this corruption, but also his concern. He didn't go over and preach to the money changers and try and, convert them, change their souls. When he saw that injustice, he acted. The apostles, the same. James, faith without works is dead. So I mean, I can go on and on, right?
yeah,
It very clearly. And I also don't want to minimize the importance of preachers. So, like John Calvin said, a bricklayer and a preacher are equally important, but they're equally important.
right.
So I think we need missionaries, we need pastors to preach and to evangelize. But when the church thinks that that's the only thing that's important, that's where we get messed up because we have stopped loving people where they are. And if the young woman has just been raped and we say, well, don't worry about that, we're just going to preach it to you. Or if the family is under threat, or the public schools only have 100 days of school a year and their kids aren't learning anything, don't worry about that. You're going to heaven soon, right? Like I don't think anybody really does that, but we often talk like that, and I
Mm.
think we theologically think like that. In practice, we're often better than our theology. Um, so so I think that's the theological tradition I come from, and it seems like extremely biblical. And in my own personal journey, I think it's just like everybody, right? Like we do what seems to make sense to us, sometimes because it's what we have to do, but lots of times it's because what we choose to do. And then that slowly changes. So when we first came down to Central America and we're working with World Renew, I love that work. And we were working with poor communities uh, and local partners that were doing agriculture, health, literacy, helping people start small businesses. Those were 6 years. I would not replace those with anything.
Mm.
I went back to school and I was convinced that I wanted to go back to Honduras and kind of keep doing the same thing. But I wanted to start a semester for college students because when we came down, we knew really almost zero about what we were supposed to be doing. I
If
thought,
you could back up for a second,
uh-huh.
I'm curious, when you went back to school, was it in order to come out the other side to be able to provide the program that you and Joanne ran, or
Mhm.
were there specific questions, or a line of inquiry that you were pursuing? I think it was the PhD with Cornell.
Yep.
Um, yeah, were there specific questions that you were grappling with that led you to do that?
I think both, but I think honestly it was mostly more the first.
Okay.
I think Joanne and I became convinced after our 6 years that like, wow, there was all this stuff we should have known before we started this. And lots of our friends, people we met here, but also people from college that were doing similar sorts of work that were very unprepared by their college education. And we thought, it would be really cool to do a semester in Honduras and get college kids to come down and give them like an overview of like, you don't need to go to Honduras. Maybe you're going to be in Chicago, maybe you're going to be in the Philippines, but what are the things in a semester we could teach you that will give you the skills to know where to start? So that's what we wanted to do. And yes, I learned a ton in my PhD. But what's interesting is I was convinced I was mostly passionate about this community development, about helping poor communities in a similar sort of way. And I remember a professor saying, I'd be really interested in working with you. It's been nice having you in my class. Would you be interested in more structural stuff and more, I'd be interested to be on your PhD committee if you were interested in more structural stuff. And I'm like, I'm interested, but mostly I want to stay in this community development stuff. So that was like a year later, I was completely doing a 180 on that question, right? So that shows you how fast things can change. And I can tell you that story. Very first semester, we had 20 college students, Calvin, Westmont, Biola, a bunch of schools, Azusa, and they came down and we taught the whole first month was all about Honduras history, politics, culture, and we did tons of visits, brought in speakers. And then the second month was all about community development. That's stuff that I had been doing and I really liked. And honestly, I still don't even know why, but the third class was on macro issues. And somehow I had decided, and I got this book and it had a chapter on corruption and it had a chapter on violence, a chapter on trade, and it was a big old thick textbook. And I loved it. And we were going through the second class, and I'd say, students like microenterprise, what's the problem microenterprises are trying to fix? Lack of credit and training. What's the solution? Well, we'll give them some credit and training. Who's doing that? And the students themselves would know of 10 or 20 organizations doing microenterprise work. And we went through each one like that. Then we went to the third class with the big thick textbook. And one of the topics is corruption. Another one's violence. And I'm like, what's the problem we're trying to address here? What's the solution? And I'd say, how many organizations do you know working on those? Because I just was following the same format, right?
Yeah.
And they couldn't come up with any. And I could only come up with one. And literally in Honduras, I bet you there are 1,000 nonprofits working with microenterprise here. And we couldn't come up with a single one working on corruption. And we couldn't come up with a single one working on violence. And so within 3 months from telling a professor I wasn't interested in macro issues, taught that class, and I felt like God had put this weight on my shoulder and says, how is it possible that the poor are suffering in Honduras under all of these systemic issues like violence and corruption? And there are not only no Christian organizations, pretty much no organizations working on this. And like, you got to do something about it. So that's how that happened.
So now I have so many questions. There's a story that you tell about a woman who started a business. I think she was sewing pillows, right?
Yep.
And she started growing her business and hiring other folks she was providing opportunities for other folks. But then talking about corruption, I guess a gang found out that she was doing well and came around and said, well, if nice pillows you have there, nice business you have there kind of a thing, and you're going to be paying protection to the point. And I'll let you tell the story a little bit more fully. But my question is, talking about corruption, it's not just how you solve it, but how do you even know where to begin? It's so pervasive, so ubiquitous. Where do you begin? And how can one person or even one group of friends that started in a garage have the capacity to even start? It's not just like one hole in a dike that you're plugging. Where do you begin, and how do you do it? How do you solve something so pervasive?
Yeah. And I'm going to preface my answer with a, a different piece.
Okay.
I think what you just said was what I and almost everybody always believe, that if you want to help a poor person like start a business, that's pretty easy and fast. But if you want to address any systemic issues, it's really complicated and it's going to take a long time. And I think two things. I think because there's a lack of people trying to do it, it looks like it's super hard. And two, we tell ourselves that lie because it often is dangerous. It's difficult, but I don't think it often takes that long. And I'll tell you really one more quick piece. So I think this is a lie because on both sides. So let's say the public schools in Honduras are a mess. We're going to start a little private school, and you will learn very quickly how complicated that is. You have to raise money for teachers, administrators. You have to build a building. You have to keep that place running well. You have to make sure people aren't stealing money. You have to get government permission. And for years, you're going to have to keep funding that just to keep that school for 200 kids. Like there's nothing easy, cheap, uncomplicated about that. And then people would say, oh, but that's still way easier than getting, the public schools in Honduras fixed or the public schools in Chicago fixed. And I think it's not, and we have seen that it's not. It's not easier, it's not harder, it's not slower. And I can tell you stories about that. I'm going to switch to it. I should have started with a violence example, but I'll go to your story. So I think I think I want all of us to question this idea that helping the poor person or a few people, school or whatever it is a lot easier and cheaper than fixing these systemic issues. And so the story you were telling is you basically told it already. It's exactly right. One of our neighbor women started a pillow business. She ended up hiring one, then two, and she had three people working for her. And the gang showed up and was asking for a certain amount a week so that nothing would happen to her or her business. So they could shoot somebody, one of her kids. Those are the threats, and they do them. And soon, though, they were asking for more than what her profits were. I mean, she started losing money on her business and she ended up closing up out of fear, but also financially, it just didn't make sense. That story is not the exception. Like that happens every day in Honduras, all over. And so this is, I think, will feed into what my preface to the answer. I think it's a story of corruption, probably more a story of violence. So when I think about corruption, it's usually government. Governments are the corrupt actors, and violence is more private, between private actors. So the gangs would be a private actor. So in our neighborhood, we had this Carlos, my best friend, and I had started this little nonprofit back then called ASJ. We had a couple of employees. And one day I was coming home from work and my kids were home and crying and upset. And it ended up that they had got sent home early because somebody had been killed, but we didn't know why. So I went over to Carlos, and Carlos said, yeah, the dad of a classmate of Anna and Noah's was killed this morning, and he sold fruits and vegetables out of the back of a pickup truck. He was going down at like 5 a.m. It was still dark to buy the fruits and vegetables, probably had a couple $100s in his pocket. Then three guys with ski masks walked up. They took his money, and after they took his money, they shot him in the head, but for no reason. And that he knew this because the wife had come and talked to him. And so it was sad and shocking, but not that uncommon in our neighborhood. So it wasn't the first time or the last time we would hear these stories. So probably less shocked than some of you might have been. But then about 2 weeks later, probably less, maybe 10 days later, Carlos showed up and to my house and he said the widow just came and she knows who they were. She knows who the three guys were. There's two neighbors who saw them when they ran away. They took the ski masks off and they saw their faces. They're neighbors of ours. They live like 3 blocks away.
Yeah.
So what should we do? And we knew that there was corruption in the local police. You often heard that the police were friends or family of the gang members, and so like you couldn't just go to the police station and tell them because you might be the next victim. So we started to make contact and try and figure things out and didn't get very far. And about I don't even remember, but it's 6 weeks, maybe 2 months went by. And these guys killed an off-duty cop, and that brought a strong reaction. Helicopters, the whole deal. One of them was killed, and two of them were arrested. And so that, in a way, for us was kind of the end. But Carlos and I, maybe another week or two later, were sitting around drinking tea. We're both tea drinkers and talking about this. And like those three guys, like this is not unusual in our neighborhood, but they seemed especially cruel. And I said, I know around my church, X, Y, and Z were killed. And Carlos is like, by my church was A, B, and C. And plus, the dad from the school, that's 7. And so we started doing math and talking to people, and we ended up coming up with 13 people who they had killed after we knew who they were.
Mm.
And that felt really shitty.
Yeah.
Like, and so I'm telling you this, like we had no intention to go after this issue in our own neighborhood, for sure not. Like we lived there, our kids lived there. But again, it felt like God put this weight on our shoulder. Like, how could you had this little justice organization and this happened in your backyard and you didn't do anything? And so we started thinking like, why didn't we do anything? It's because we didn't know any cops. We didn't trust the cops. We didn't know who to go to. And then we had the idea like, what if we found a Christian cop or maybe an ex-cop and we trusted them and we could hire them and they would know within the cops who the good cops and bad cops are. We needed a bridge of trust. And then we thought the same with a lawyer with the prosecutor's office. So there's no huge, we didn't spend a year studying this. We're like, what if we did this? And that makes sense to us. So we did. We hired an ex-cop. We hired a lawyer who knew lots of prosecutors. And they started working with victims and witnesses. And we had about 50 homicides in 2005. And 3 years later, we were down to 8 in our neighborhood. And so that story tells a bunch of things, right? That it didn't take that long. It wasn't that hard. It didn't take PhDs to figure this out. It was Christians trying to be brave. And then we ended up doing that at a much bigger level, right, as well. But I think that story still emboldens me. I hope it emboldens others, right? Like that we can change things that seem really complicated and difficult, and it often isn't as hard as we think.
So there's a couple aspects that I'm really curious about. One, if a movie gets made about your work down there, it'll probably cover a lot of the danger. That's part of the question. And from what I understand, Joanne is really your courage in a lot of ways. So I want to get to that. But first, there's a less sexy part of it that maybe the movie won't be so much about. So you hired, I think his name was Cholo. Is that right? Cholo. And Dionisio was the later lawyer, the first lawyer, that character with the ponytail. But just being able to hire an ex-cop, being able to hire a lawyer, how were you able to raise the support? How were you able to raise just pay for it? Just because when you go back to church, your home church, and say, hey, we saved 30 souls on this last weekend retreat. That's something. Oh, great. You get a lot of contributions. But when you're saying, you know, oh man, well, we have to hire an attorney. I how does that go from a sorry, this isn't a sexy question, but
Yeah.
you got to.
No, it's a great question. Uh, so I would say it's probably another myth. So the myth is that Christian donors in the US just want to give to something where they can see very visible, tangible results or evangelism. So, if you build a school, they like that. If you build a clinic, or if you like building churches, preaching in churches, saving souls, then they'll like that. And I think that's true. So it's not a complete myth like most myths
Okay.
are, but it's way less true than you think.
Okay.
And I think that may be the majority of people, majority of Christians, but there is a good chunk of people that know that the potential for that is limited, right? And that it is not the only way to do things, and it really isn't addressing a lot of the bigger issues like it wouldn't in their own city, right? They know in Chicago that the public schools that serve 2 million public school kids in Chicago are not going to be fixed by starting a little school in one neighborhood. And so that's not a bad thing, but it would be great if someone addressed the whole public schools in Chicago issue. So we have found, and again, it does take work. It takes a lot more explaining. It takes a lot more sort of building of relationships. But there are lots of donors in the US interested in this, especially once they understand it, come and visit. And I also am seeing lots of young people and young Christians who are turned off by traditional fundraising ways of doing things that are even more interested in this work.
Um, and then what about, I couldn't help but think, imagine that conversation that I would have with Lisa, my wife. Hey, hun, we're moving to Honduras. Not only that, we're going to move to one of the most dangerous neighborhoods. How do those conversations, because you raised kids there, how do those conversations go? And I would imagine, like, if you lose sleep at night, that's what you're losing sleep over is putting not just yourself, but your family in harm's way. How does that thought process go? Those conversations with Joanne go?
Uh, so I have a good friend in Chicago who often says, nowhere in the Bible does it say to be safe. And yet that's often the first question we get from Christians, like, even calling us irresponsible, right? That somehow we are doing a bad thing. And if you look at the life of Jesus and the life of the prophets and the life of the apostles, they were certainly did not make safe decisions, and often paid the price. So that's where I would start a little bit theologically. Personally, you said it. I think you're right. Like Joanne this is not me convincing Joanne. Joanne is in most things braver than I am. I'm also more the idea person. So like I'll come up with the idea and then we'll talk about it. But if anything, she often takes it to the next level before I did. So like moving up to this neighborhood, it was my idea. It was my idea to do it for a year, and like and then we go back to living in a middle class or upper middle class neighborhood. And Joanne's like, no, like let's build a house up there. Like we're gonna stay. Um, yeah. So yeah, Joanne
So,
is amazing.
so it's a theological conviction.
No.
It's a it's a marital conviction, I guess.
I think there is a theological basis,
Yeah.
that we are called to love our neighbors. I'll go back to that again.
Yeah.
And like, we both thought, how do you love your neighbor when you live? We had a friend who lived in a middle class neighborhood and said that whenever he would go to preach in someone's church, he would take the same method of transportation that the people from that church took. So if
Mm.
everybody arrived in church in cars, he would go in a car. But if they all came in buses, he would take the bus. If they all walked, he walked. That was his little attempt to try and put himself in the shoes of his congregants, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the idea, right? If we lived in Nueva Suyapa, one of the poorest, Nueva Suyapa is a little better, but it used to have like the worst reputation. Like no one would want to live there. No one would want to even drive through there. If we lived there, we would understand much better what the needs of those people are and then how to better love, how to better serve them. And it was true. Carlos says, moving to Nueva Suyapa, so he did it first. He was braver than we were. That was his second conversion,
Mm.
to understand how to both the people there, but I would say more how to live out his faith.
How is Carlos doing? How's him and his family?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Carlos is the face of ASJ here in Honduras. He's in the media every day, probably on TV, newspaper, radio, 10 to 15 times a week, and has also been under huge amounts of attack by people who don't like the stuff that we're doing. So on Facebook, they go after him and Twitter. And I think that has taken a toll on him. Like he's amazingly resilient, positive, happy most of the time. But I think all of that it does wear on you.
Mm.
And like I'm super grateful. I'm not in the media. I'm not on TV. I do these podcasts. That's as far as I go. Nothing here in Honduras. And I don't get attacked like that. I hardly ever get mentioned here, even on social media. So yeah, but he's doing well. I mean, he's an amazingly almost every day he comes into the office, he has a new idea. Like, I
Yeah.
think we're gonna try this.
That's great. Yeah. I love the how the in Ross Halpern's book, Bear Witness, which gives a pretty good account. I'm actually curious. We don't have to get into it now, but I'm curious. I think you've said that it's about 90% on the money. So I'm curious about the 10% that he got wrong, but we don't have to talk about that now. Um, One of the things I am curious about, since he brought it up, is the last 10, 15 years, there your organization and you and Carlos have had access at the highest levels and even influence. And with a different regime right now, that's not necessarily the case. I was curious if you were to be able to have influence at those levels again, how might you go about that differently? Whether it's how you've talked about being close enough to have influence, but distant enough to stay objective about it, to be clear about what matters and what the truth is. But that's in relation to the people in power. But as you're describing, a lot of what's weighing Carlos down right now is what's being said, the how your work is being perceived. So I'm curious about all of that. If you were in those positions again, or if you're talking to folks here in the States, I mean, I couldn't help but think throughout Halpern's account that there are similarities to what's happening now in the United States. So how might you treat those opportunities differently if you were given access again?
Um, so I think that's actually one of the pieces that I think Ross oversold.
Okay.
Um, and made it a much bigger moral dilemma than I think it was or is. So if you want to make changes in the city of Chicago, it's going to mean that you have to sit down with the decision makers, right? With the mayor, the city council, uh, chief of police, if it's about violence. And there are clearly issues, right? They will try and use you to make themselves look better, to cover their errors, etc. And you are trying to use or influence them, but in the end, use them to make the changes that you think need to happen, that God wants, right? Like better protection for the poor in policing and better schools. So I think that little phrase is accurate, right? You want to be close enough to influence, but you need to be far enough away to speak the truth. The every day-to-day actions of that is not easy, right? Like, am I getting too close? Am I too far away? Uh, they will be asking for favors. They'll say, I can do this for you, but can you not make this public, right? Can you not say that you're the one who got me to do this? And you have to decide, like, is that okay? But I think that we do that every day, right? We do that in our everyday actions with our bosses, with our employees. We are trying to walk that line of ethical behavior where we're not keeping in mind the greater good, but also protecting the individual. And that's, I think, the payoffs all the time. So yes, this current government, especially the first 2 years, it's dropped considerably, was very antagonistic towards us because a lot of, I think, what our most successful work was done in the previous 8 years under a different political party. So then this political party said, you guys helped him be successful in a few things, education, policing. So, now you're on our blacklist. And that happens. Yeah, we're seeing that in Washington, right?
Yeah.
So it often feels like it doesn't matter if someone did something good or bad, and under the Democrats, the Trump administration, anybody who helped them is on my bad list.
Yeah.
Some of them maybe did bad things, but probably some of them didn't, but they're the opposition now, right? And it's us versus them. And so that same thing is true here. We're having elections in less than 2 months. We'll have a new government here. There's two candidates leading in the polls. Both are from different political parties than the one in power now. I'm quite certain we're going to have a very open door, maybe not quite as open as in the past, but I think we'll have a very open door with either of them if they win. And I think we're going to go back to doing what we didn't stop it under this government, even though they were attacking us. And we said, this is what's broken in the schools. This is what's broken in policing. Extortion, which is the crime that we were talking about with the pillow business. The gangs were extorting people. Extortion went from 8% of the population paying extortion to 13%.
Yeah.
So 13% of households in Honduras are paying extortion to the gang. And under this government, it went up 5%. And we said that, and that the government really got the government pissed off. But we had a whole set of solutions of how to fix that. And we were happy to meet with them and talk with them about it, but they didn't want to. And they didn't want to talk to us, but this isn't just an ASJ thing. They don't want to talk to anybody. They don't talk to other nonprofits, even organizations that are friendly with them, they don't want to meet with. So it's just a style of government they think they have the answers, and it hasn't gone well for them.
Yeah. How has this administration affected you, perhaps your funding? I couldn't help but think that in basically uh, like U.S. aid, that's been slashed, if not sacked altogether. Has that impacted your funding, for example?
The Trump administration or
Yeah,
the Biden
yeah,
administration? The Trump administration.
yeah. Were you supported by any? I would imagine some of your funding came from uh,
Yeah.
U.S. government sources, right?
In the first Trump administration, he did the same thing, but just to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. So that was like a trial run, I guess. He cut all government aid to these three countries because of migration. He said, "You're sending us so many migrants, we're just going to stop giving you aid, and hopefully that will encourage you or push you to crack down." So at that point, I think it was about 40%. So almost half of our money came from the US government, and it was crippling, right? So we had to lay off, I think, like 40 staff. We had a staff of about 80. So half our people went home. It was very difficult. And we decided then we're never going to have that much of our funding be government. So we have worked very hard over the last 5, 6 years to increase funding from other sources. So when this happened, it was only 8% of our funds. So we did have some, but not much. So it wasn't a big effect on us. It was a huge effect on other nonprofits here. World Vision took a big hit, others as well. I will say that I I think that the Trump administration was correct that USAID needed a major overhaul.
Mm.
We have had some very good experiences with some of those projects, and we've had terrible experiences. And I don't think that the way that they went about this, like just they threw out the baby with the bathwater, right?
Right.
So there was, if they would have done a major overhaul, I would have been very happy.
Mm.
Uh, and I'm hoping that either they or the next administration, whoever that is, will will take this opportunity to fix a lot of the problems that USAID had.
I do want to give you a couple seconds. There was a quote at the end of Bear Witness, Ross Halpern's book, where you said, "We have celebrated so much progress in Honduras over the years, new laws, stronger systems, 200 days of class, a declining homicide rate. But in the chaotic moments after the election, in the middle of so much uncertainty and polarization, I questioned if we had really moved forward." But you have moved forward. So I'd love for you to talk about a little bit, go into a little bit more depth about some of the progress that you've made.
Yeah, I've alluded to it a few things. So one of the things ASJ works on in Honduras is the public education system. So there's 2 million kids in the Honduran public schools. And when we started working, they were averaging 113 days of school. So that's in the US, most schools are 180 to 200. So Honduran kids were only getting 113. We started a major campaign, 200 days of school. It's in the Honduran Constitution. Kids are supposed to get 200. They just never did it. And most people didn't know they were supposed to get 200. And in the end, for 5 years running, up until COVID, kids were getting 218 days of school on average, so over the goal. So again, a nice example that this was helping 2 million kids. It didn't take decades and decades, and we could dramatically improve education. You could imagine how much more kids learn, almost double the amount of days of school, right? In math and in reading.
And
And
and not to oversimplify, I know because like the murder rate alone is something that we could talk about for an hour, if not longer. But the way to go about that, I don't mean to oversimplify, but the way to go about that is by just showing up. In our case, if we're thinking about problems in our neighborhoods, or in our states or in our country, show up to the school board meetings, show up to the town council meetings, show up. Is that kind of where we start, or is it something different?
I could give you a super quick version. So our
Sure.
strategy almost always has the same four pieces. So at days of school, we documented, we did research, and we said we got data and we put it all together. Said this is kids are supposed to get 200 days. They're only getting 113 over the last 10 years. That's the average. And everybody was shocked. People knew it was bad. They had no idea that was the data, right? So once we had the data, it was shocking. And then we built an alliance and we got the Catholic Church, we got the Protestant Church. So those two groups in Honduras, they don't usually work together, but they're super powerful. Everybody's a Catholic or a Protestant. So built an alliance and we got those people talking about 200 days and that this had to be fixed. And then we had a proposal of how to fix it, and we got that in the media. So we had a communication strategy, and we talked about it, and the Catholics talked about it, and the Protestants talked about it, and World Vision talked about it, and people were hearing it from all over, and the politicians were hearing it. And then we do lobbying, and then we'll sit down with, and in that case, it was with the president. And the president ended up firing the minister of education and hiring a new guy. And his first mandate was to come to our office and figure out how to fix that, because it wasn't because the president cared so much about public education. He cared a lot about his career, and we were making him look bad, and he had to fix that, right? So investigations, alliance building, communication, and then lobbying, and that's where you get the decision makers to make the changes. So pretty
That's
much
great.
everything we do, it's those four pieces. It isn't often the grassroots piece of showing up at school boards, local meetings. We're going like straight to the top usually.
Yeah, yeah. Now I know we're up against it time wise. Can I squeeze another 5 minutes out of you?
Yeah.
Terrific. So this you mentioned uh, us versus them, and that seems to be the world we live in. So I want to ask you what we call the TP&R question: talk of politics and religion without killing each other. I'm imagining your dad, for example. I would imagine your dad was more of a Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, maybe Jack Kemp type of a conservative. Some folks I know that kind of were along that line of conservatism did find their way to Trumpism. Others are what you might call never Trumpers, or pro-democracy conservatives. I'm curious how your conversations, maybe with your dad, are when it comes to politics or other hard issues. But here's the question. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So that's people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
So at ASJ, Joanne and I end up, I think, having the privilege of like going into the homes of all sorts of people, of our donors and people that might want to be donors. And the whole spectrum politically, right? From super anti-Trump to super pro-Trump, or in the past, anti-Biden, pro-Biden. Um, and I think we saw ourselves a couple of years ago shying away from talking about this stuff because we were worried that it's going to affect our donations and things. And in the end, I would say a couple of years ago, we decided, I think we still do it carefully and, a little judiciously, but we try and talk about this with everybody, and we try and just be curious. And I
Mm,
feel like we have learned so much, not by telling people things, but by listening. And, talking to almond farmers in Visalia, California about immigration, and, the dairy farmers there saying, almost all of our workers don't have papers. Like, and but they love Trump, and they're like, he's not going to go after our workers, right? He's going to go after the bad guys, the people. And then we've told our workers, like, if they beat their wife or they're drunk driving, they're going to get sent back and we're not going to help them. But if they're doing their job and we're going to, we'll keep them safe. Um, so I think I'm not anti-Trump. I'm not like AID is a good example. I think that it was a very broken system. Our immigration system was completely broken, right? And so oftentimes what I'm most upset about is the way he's going about, both the way he talks about it, but the way he goes about, he doesn't even have the idea of trying to fix it. But especially the immigration system, we know something has to happen. There needs to be a system, but they're not talking about that yet, and hopefully they will. So yes, my suggestion is to be much more curious and to listen better. And I think we'll often figure out like these people are not nearly as crazy as we thought they were on either side. And they often, one of the things I think that people who voted for Trump often feel like the Democrats demean them and treat them like they're stupid and like they don't know anything, and they've done it for years. And if just listen to them and their arguments and why they think what they do makes that not true and you end up learning a ton. And I often feel like when you listen to the Democrats carefully, or the sort of the furthest to the Democrat side, they also they do feel like the other side is, but when you listen to them and you talk for a while, they're much more willing to recognize that our side was wrong too, that they admit that some of this stuff was not good, uh, and more, I guess, a softer heart and more willing to talk about how both sides need to fix things and work together.
Yeah. Yeah. Do
This is
you have,
also very true in Honduras. The exact same things are happening here.
yeah. Yeah. No, the way that the party, the current president talks about the prior administration and, the prior administration before that. And so I see it's not unique to the United States. Before we wrap up, do you have any questions for me?
No, I'm going to congratulate you. That'll be my final thing. Corey, I've been on a bunch of these, and I think you're the person that by far has done the best research and asked the really good questions. So,
Oh, thanks.
not trying to knock anyone else, but you did your homework and it showed, and I hope your listeners find it interesting.
Oh man, that's really a thrill for me to hear. I appreciate you saying that. I didn't want you to waste your time. That's so,
Or your
but
listeners.
your work is really inspiring, and fascinating story. So I really appreciate your work. How can folks, if folks want to find out more about you, follow you, or more information about Association for More Just Society, just all the great work that you're doing, how can folks find more information?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll put the
Yeah,
webpage in your
in the show notes.
in
Yeah.
the show notes, but it's www.asj-us.org. And there's asj-us.org. There's also the ASJ Honduras page, but it's in Spanish. And if you want to go there, there's info about what we do. There's info about the books. There's a little video of Carlos, another one of me and of Ross, talking about what we liked about the book and what we didn't. And so, yeah, I think
Is
hopefully
Ross going to try to get a movie made? And if so, who plays you?
yeah, he's working on it.
Oh
So
wow. Okay.
yeah, there's I guess two potential groups interested. So we'll
All
see
right.
where that goes.
Does Joanne want who? Meryl
Matt
Streep
Damon.
maybe, or
How'd you think Matt Damon maybe?
There you go. That's terrific. Well, this was fantastic. We did cover a lot. Is there anything important we haven't discussed you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think you did a great job. Thank
Thanks
you.
so much, Kurt. This was really terrific. I really appreciate your time, man, and wish you all the best. Thanks again for doing this.
Yeah.
And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write the review, and now you can watch these conversations on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. And I am at Corey S. Nathan at Corey S as in Sam Nathan on all the socials, as well as Substack. We're having some great conversations over there. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.